as a knowledge management and learning manager, and Jhpiego project, which is actually AUAFP for Pathfinder International.
Okay. So this thing, because we expect, yes, I think that's a nuisance being reminded that we are being recorded. So in any case, I think we'll give it another 2 minutes for us to get to the full complement of people who are planning to join this roundtable discussion. Each of the roundtables have been allotted around 15 participants, and right now we are looking at minus the facilitator and facilitators is that we have around 5 participants. Now it's 9. So welcome everyone. In a short while, we'll start the roundtable discussion. Welcome, Beverly. So it's 10:05 and we have a relatively full agenda for today. And so we'd like to start the ball rolling by just providing a little bit of a background to this roundtable session on resource mobilization for family planning. So my name is Ricky Liu. I'm with Jhpiego as the Family Planning Director, and I'm co-facilitating this with Pauline Runga. Pauline, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Thank you, Ricky. Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline Irungu, and I work for PATH. I'm based in Nairobi, and part of my responsibility is advocacy and public policy for the country office, and a few other things I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. And then we have the session organizer with us as well, Angeline Mutunga, or Angela for short. Angela?
Hi, everyone. Sending you warmth, energy, everything that we need for this session all the way from Nairobi. I work with Momentum Country Global and Leadership Office, a program, and I'm very excited that you could all make it to be here. Looking forward to a rich discussion.
Yes. So for this session, what we will be focusing on is the aspect on advocacy and accountability, particularly focused on civil society organizations and their effort towards resource mobilization. As everyone is familiar with, the advocacy effort is an evidence-based approach to encourage or promote or support a collective action that is targeted towards decision makers in order to either change policy or update policy, create policy, or support programs or take actions and take actions. And one of those actions would include, for example, like being able to mobilize resources domestically, either from the government or from private sector or from international donor agencies to support family planning. So in this session, we'll be focused on really looking at sharing country level lessons learned from developing that capacity and that effort towards leveraging domestic resources, seeing the successes as well as the lessons and tweaks in order to pick up from gaps in implementation to moving them to successes. And then lastly, also taking a look at what are the other areas of advocacy towards resource mobilization we should be looking at in terms of what else do we need to be learning, or what can we continue to partner in order to improve access as well as availability of resources to support commitment towards family planning. So in this session, what we're going to be doing is to use 30 to 40 minutes of our time to gather lessons learned as well as share experiences from colleagues who have been working at leveraging domestic resources. But before we go into that one, I'd like to move us into some ground rules or some norms that we'll be following for this session. And I'll hand over the next slide to Pauline.
Thank you, Ricky. So just to enable us to be efficient and to work really well during this session, just a few things. One of the things that we would really encourage you to do is when you want to contribute, please use the hand raise function. If you go to where the chat box, the participants list is, usually you'll see that hand raise function over there. Also, feel free to use the chat function. So you can post a comment, an issue, or even a question, whatever the contribution is, into the chat box. We also want to request you if you're not speaking, please mute your mic so that we reduce background and it makes it easy for everybody else to hear each other. We would also love to see your faces if your bandwidth can allow. So please turn on your cameras. I know that there are people who may have difficulties with bandwidth. If not, that's still fine, but it would be good to see your faces. Then the other thing is in terms of management of time, if we've got about 40 minutes, that's not a lot of time. So please limit your comments. Be very concise to a max of 1 or 2 minutes so that we can all be able to share our ideas. And then finally, we really want to ask you to stay on topic so that we have a focused conversation that enables us to draw good lessons, to identify ways of working, as well as also hear some challenges and how we are surmounting this. So I think with that, I'll move you to the first piece, that it would be lovely for us to know each other, so that as we contribute, we know who is in the room, who is participating. So for that, please use the chat box and please put down your name, your affiliation, that's the organization you're linked to, and then put down the country that you're calling in from. That would be absolutely helpful so that we have a sense of where we are. So you can either do this. So for the countries, let me do this for the countries. We would love to have a graphic way of seeing where we are all located. So if you go to if you see the slide that I'm projecting, if you hover your cursor at the top of your screen, a drop-down menu will show up. If you count from the right, the third button is called Annotate. It's got a thing that looks like a pen. If you click on it, I hope you can all see what I'm doing. You will have another drop-down menu, and if you move along that menu, as if you're reading, you'll see something called Stamp. You can click on Stamp, and then for intros, please use the star so that we'll see where you are. So I've taken the star, and there. You can also undo if you want, but it would be great if you can let your star stay so that we can take a screenshot of this. Thank you very much. Over back to you, Ricky.
So we'll give a couple of our colleagues some time to complete this one. So we now have Moasam, we have Beverly, Plavi. Okay. So Moasam, I thought that you were somewhere in the middle of Russia. I'm glad you're back in somewhere in Geneva. So Angeline, yeah, with a heart. Okay. Okay. So I think we have most of the participants already accounted for in this slide. It's going to be recorded anyway, so it should appear and it should be captured in the recording. So moving on, can we move on to the next slide, Pauline? Mm-hmm. Pauline? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Pauline, for that one. So as I mentioned earlier, the topic for this roundtable is really around sustainable domestic financing for family planning, looking at multiple country key learnings and practical tactics. What we'd like to be doing is that in the next 30 to 40 minutes is focus on three guidance questions that we want our participants in this roundtable to share with us their learnings, their experience around one, what works to enable, ensure resource mobilization advocacy successes. In this question, we could be looking at what tools, what approaches, what are the key elements to ensure success. Essentially, what we want to try to capture are learnings as well as experiences that our participants, colleagues here could share with the group. And then the second question looks into that as much as we see a lot of reports on successes on resource mobilization, is that some of the challenges, some of the tweaks, some of the issues in terms of our approaches do not generally turn out to be a straight pathway, is that there would be bumps along the way. And so we'd like to also try to gather learnings, particularly for how CSOs or how approaches or how programs have been able to adjust or modify their approaches in order to get to their quick wins. So in looking at this one, it's also being able to list down shortly some of the key learnings that would be really very helpful for civil society organizations when they're faced with challenges and when they're faced with approaches that do not seem to move them towards their goal. And last but not the least is to identify where and what are gaps in the advocacy approach for resource mobilization that we ought to be, as a community, be focusing on, as well as working with partners both in country, regionally, as well as globally with other agencies to improve on. So with that one, we've allocated around 10 to 12 minutes for each of the questions. And what we'd like to do is start with the first question and do sort of like a round robin type of sharing and have that recorded. We were asked to do a whiteboard, but we thought that since this is recorded anyway, it would be much more easier and much more convenient to just ask each participant to raise their hand if they want to contribute and share with us their experience. So we could start with the first question: what works to enable, ensure resource mobilization advocacy successes? And I'd like to see anyone who wants to start off that sharing. I'll mute myself so that we can hear the.
Yeah, sure. I can start if nobody else wants to go. So I think one thing that has been really effective for domestic resource mobilization, particularly looking at advocacy and family planning, is the use of local data. So depending on who the advocate is trying to target in terms of decision making, trying to get data that's as local as possible. So whether that's at the community level, at the district level, at the national level, kind of depending on who the decision maker is, finding sort of a set of data talking points or information that's most applicable to them and their role and kind of the reach of decision making that they have, I think can be really effective. And I know Jhpiego has a couple examples of that, and working with youth-led advocacy and having youth advocates who sought out specific data points from a local hospital to then make policy changes at the hospital level that were then brought upwards to higher level decision makers. So I think, yeah, just finding data that's really localized and relevant to the decision makers' interests.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing that local data use. Next, anyone else who wants to share their experience?
Yeah, can I go? I don't seem to see my the raised hand, but
yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so again, just be to carry on from where Sarah Webb has sort of put in. I think the data is good, and then what we've realized is like working with the Challenge Initiative East Africa is like the clarity of motivation has to be there, and like when we presented data, the fact that there is a felt need for that issue, whether it's teenage pregnancy, whether it is the issue around a capacity problem within family planning, that there's a felt need within that within that local government or within that community. I think in addition to the use of the data has been useful. And I think really the element around the motivation why they would want to put resources to it, and what really do they value? Do they value the fact that they're able to provide better services? Do they value the fact that they will be able to reduce some of their indicators and all that? So again, also looking at that clarity for the local government in terms of this, we really value the gap that the data is showing us. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, for that insight into clarifying and really being very focused on not only the data, but what type of data and how that data is going to be utilized towards advocacy. So before I further have a question around this one, is anyone else who wants to share what's work in terms of tools, in terms of approaches when it comes to resource mobilization?
My name is Joshua Ongwai and I work for TSW. One of the things which I have come to...
Is that Joshua? Yes? Hello,
yes.
Joshua. Go ahead.
Yes, let me please go ahead. Thank you for the chance. I think there may not be one single approach which my learnings is that you join the several pieces and bits together, and then through that it makes like easier and easily understandable. Working through the media, whereby you can do articles, appear on TV to sensitize people about the importance of this particular issue by raising awareness. And then there's now understanding the processes, like in this case, for us in DSW, I can say understanding the budget making process, whereby what are the key moments that you can easily influence, and where can you get the maximum returns for you to be able to influence, and what collaborations are there for you to use, so that even whoever is responsible for ensuring the commitments are done, are implemented. In this case, working through young people, the CSO partners, the media, and then of course using the evidence, as my other colleagues from other organizations have said, when you package all this, then there is a chance that we can attain, our advocacy can be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. If I could do two quick follow-ups on that question, on your response. Oh, who's speaking, please? I can see you.
It's Angela, and I know Ricky, Pauline, and I also work at the country level, so I don't want to miss out. So adding to the list from my colleagues, again, I have found that sustainable capacity building is very critical. So all the time, when new advocates are coming into the space, it is very important for local faculties to be empowered so that after project ends, then they can they can sustain the moment of advocates being able to effectively then carry on with their citizen duties of engaging their decision makers. And so one practical case in point that I can note is what I have seen Paul Nyachai at TCI the advanced family planning across many countries doing is to develop local faculties. PATH as an elaborate curriculum amongst many others. And I've also seen immense tools and capacity building approaches from DSW who really unpack the budget cycles in various countries very well. So what I can say is that, as we move to question 3, sustained capacity building is extremely essential and critical, and as part of sustainability approaches that needs to be looked at. Finally, champions building. It's one thing to have the evidence and package great asks. It's another to be able to be accorded the seat on the table. So what we've learned as advocates is not to compete in that space, but try to figure out the most, credible, or not really credible, but the most appealing person, not only to open the door, but also to work with champions who can, at whatever level, whether it's a presidential level, whether it's a village level, be able to be a good support of the message, because their face, their clout, and everything means a lot. And finally, believing and trusting that citizens have the power and ability to speak for themselves, and so continue to figure out tactics of making sure that citizens are empowered to be able to engage diverse decision makers 24/7, wherever they are. Finally, Ricky, meeting countries where they are. One win in Kenya might mean nothing in a very advanced country. And so, especially a message to donors in advocacy, sometimes high goals are set up, but the principle of meeting countries where they are and appreciating that all wins, depending on where a country is critical. So those are some of the key lessons I have learned, to just take countries where they are and be able not to compare them in a way then that demotivates advocates across board from doing what they know how to do best, based on where a country is. Thanks.
Ricky, let me jump in a little bit.
Sure, please go ahead. We have 1 to 2 minutes before moving on to the next question. This is because I reached this input so far. Go ahead, please, Pauline.
2 quick points, and I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. So one thing we've learned when working at PATH is the value of becoming a technical assistance stroke technical advocate within the system, because that enables you to understand how does, particularly when you're targeting government, how are decisions made, who makes the decisions, how can you influence those decisions? And sometimes we assume that the decision makers have a solution when they don't. We assume they know when they don't, but they are tasked with making the decision. So being the person they go to so that you can help them with figuring a solution is a really good way of influencing how resources are channeled. The final one I want to add is the issue of working in partnerships. I'm so glad we're doing this with Ricky when I'm sitting at a county. I just came from a meeting where where the county itself told us, let's use a partnership approach. So for example, if you put $5,000 and have an agreement with us that we will match, that is likely to go into the budget because there is incentive. So you put X, then it unlocks additional resources and enables the county to negotiate deeply, even with other actors. So I just wanted to raise that as a form of partnership to unlock resources. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pauline, for that additional insight. I think, yes, you're right on the dot in that I think we have the tools, we have the approaches, we have the practices to actually build those capacities and support champions to actually make it happen in the field. So as I was listening to the feedback, the inputs from you all, a couple of things actually sort of like came up as well in terms of moving into question number 2, what tweaks and modifications in advocacy approaches that we should be looking at to share as part of the key learning. So for example, with data utilization or using local data, the challenge that we faced that in one of the activities that we were conducting in the Philippines was that the data was not readily available locally. So we had to source it at the national level. And then when it came to, for example, what Joshua mentioned, the budget making process, is that given that the situation that we're working right now in most low and middle income countries have moved to what they call decentralized or devolved health system, is the challenge that the setup is not as centralized top-down as we have seen in the past, that we have to engage both stakeholders and decision makers at the local level and understand how you could actually affect or impact or change, translate the policies into resources in terms of budget line allocation in their annual work, under annual budget making, including, of course, understanding the timing of when that cycle actually starts and who's involved in that one. And then even with the capacity building is the fact that we have decision makers, we have advocates who may be committed, but they're also stretched too thin in terms of their workload, is that the ability to sustain the interest as well as commitment and time to nurture this champion. So in that context, I wonder if in this group that we could share what are some of those tweaks or innovations as well as adaptations that we could share in order to address some of these issues that I've shared. Thank you.
Ricky, can I share something?
Ricky, you're mute, but I guess you're saying okay to go ahead.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay. Can I?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks very much. And I think under the first question, I think some of the key issues were already highlighted. And I just like to share one of my experiences in recently, I would say 2-3 years ago, working in Pakistan, where I was working on vouchers in family planning. And just trying to connect that local data is important, and also connecting it to show the impact at the local level is equally important. So during that research, we were able to show how we can use this innovative approach of vouchers in family planning and connect it with the short-term and long-term impact of the vouchers approach in better targeting, increasing CPR, and other things. So what happened was, when we had, talking to the right people is important. So when we had the chance to talk to the Ministry of Health, made the presentation, they were very keen in understanding what is the global, of course, how vouchers work globally. But more interestingly, they were more focused on what is the results at the local level. So we were able to connect the local results and showing it that this is how it works. And then they were able to also see the value of the local data, and they start thinking about, in fact, expanding the vouchers beyond family planning to maternal child health. So immediately the health secretary was sitting there, and he made the commitment that we are going to give earmarked money, especially with a focus to reach out to the lowest 2 quintiles. So I think talking to the right people with the local data makes a difference. And I think if we can, connect them together with the right audience in the right language, that is something which is required. Because if we are talking a little too much scientific, many of the people who would be at the policy level may not be able to understand. So talking in the language to the right audience makes a difference. Thank you.
It's so true, Dr. Ali. Yeah, so true. Thank you very much for that one. Any other insight on tweaks, modifications to the advocacy approaches? Yes, Pauline.
You know, one of the things that you learn, especially when you work for the bigger organizations that are well resourced and have access to the policymakers, is your ability to engage the right people, the way Dr. Ali has said. But I think what is even more sustainable and richer, and that we've been really pushing for, is engaging the voices that naturally wouldn't be on the table and have no ability to open the door for themselves most times, unless you hold their hand and make the first step with them. So one of the things we've done in one of the counties, Kakamega, as well as Kisumu here in Kenya, and I've seen that also with our programs in Uganda, is building the capacity of the lowest level of advocates at the community level who are in touch, you know, with families and people, and enabling them to package themselves in a way that has the right language for the policymakers and decision makers. And out of that, our approach has been, don't do a one-off, don't design something that won't make sense for them and they can't sustain in the long term, but provide both resources, whether they're financial and technical, to enable them become the advocate that we are. So that sort of tweak of handing power from larger organizations to really on the ground citizens who can be able to speak to their issues best has really been profound in transforming our advocacy. And I take an example, Pat. We could go to a governor, we could go to a minister and talk about issues, but it's way more powerful when a woman from a really localized place is able to articulate the same, but we have to provide the platform. So the ability to provide platforms, build ability for agency has really been transformative for us in our advocacy and influencing. Thank you.
Oh, yes, so true. So true. Having the direct recipient actually speak to truth to power about what they need. Yes, thank you so much for that insight, Angeline. We have a couple of other people. I'd like to give them a chance to share, if any, their experience. Please feel free to either raise your hand or just introduce yourself. Paul, you wanted to say something?
Yes. I just wanted to add, in terms of some of the tweaks that we have had to do within our strategy, and I think, like Pauline said, based on some of the incentives, like the challenge fund and all that. I mean, we've been successful in terms of getting cities to commit resources, and the learning was that I think as advocates, we need to go a lot more and do additional efforts, across the whole chain. And, the element around, once the resources have come, then what happens? Because we saw, for example, we did, in terms of our planning, initial planning, putting the resources in terms of getting the resources to be committed. But once they are, they've been committed, there's a realization that there are multiple actors that we've had to work with, higher level, middle managers, the technical teams that have to, like withdraw the resources and, utilize those resources. Issues to do with the bureaucracies within, like the local government systems in terms of getting that commitment, translate into, activities that really benefit, the client at the lower level. So I think the learning really and the tweaks is in terms of how you have like a system-wide approach to domestic resource mobilization, so that once they, like I would say, like a quick win has been achieved in terms of the resources are on the table. But then what do you do, or what are the other steps that would facilitate an ongoing nature of engagement that ensures that the vision for which we were, putting the resources across have actually materialized? The issues to do with negotiating bureaucracies, even capacity building of, we've had to do like capacity building of the technical teams. This is how you do, your accounting. This is how you engage. These are sort of the signatories that are really important. And, having now to think the entire, like, for us to be successful, we have to think, yes, at the resource mobilization effort, but then at the implementation level, what do we need to do? At the level of having those resources being utilized, what do we have to do? How do we fast track that process so that, again, within the financial year, it doesn't, it doesn't just end with a commitment that hasn't been spent.
Thank you for that one, Paul, for sharing the system-wide approach to just making sure that all the linkages that needs to happen is actually addressed. One of the things based on experience in terms of tweaks and modifications is, of course, that we speak so much about stakeholders and decision makers, and which is really our target, which are the decision makers in order to affect change. I wonder to this group who are champion advocates in terms of approaches to build capacity as well as to support advocacy effort, thoughts on intractable or just even being able to identify an instance wherein opening the door in order to start a conversation doesn't usually happen in a straightforward manner. And sometimes the idea about being able to identify influencers or they're not decision makers, but they're people who could actually support or help you initiate those linkages with decision makers. I wonder if anyone has encountered wherein, for example, like in my line of work in previous life was trying to get adolescent reproductive health, particularly being able to support youth to use contraceptives. The local authorities are hesitant, the decision makers are not interested politically, they are afraid to touch that given that the local context is really a highly religious sensitivity, but being able to identify an influencer like the wife of the mayor or the governor allowed the initial conversation to actually happen. I wonder if that's has happened in any of our interventions.
Vicky, this is Angela.
Yeah.
Smart advocacy, we say, and in communication overall, that the message is as important as the messenger, or the messenger is as important as the message. My colleague earlier talked about several things. Paul raised the issue of felt need. You cannot have a messenger who doesn't share, and you build will to be at the level of being passionate. You know, when we say, who is it that doesn't sleep in a night or with fire in the belly about this issue? It is really, it takes a lot in designing an advocacy approach to be able to find those type of people, or to pick those who, it's a whole science. And there are many approaches that we use to really figure out where those people are. For sustainability in a country, it is so critical that advocates, at the very early on, work hand in hand with their messengers. And because the other thing that we are faced with, Ricky and colleagues, is that decision makers in our world changes a lot. Today you have this decision maker, tomorrow they've changed. So an advocate has to be quite on the lookout to appreciate those trends and be able to quickly tailor their approaches and ensure that the right messages with the right message part and parcel of the process. I think one of the areas where we might need to make tweaks going forward is now expanding the messengers to Ricky, what you're calling influencers as well, because I think in the countries where I've worked, I don't think, we've used influencers like musicians who could do songs because our work focuses on getting the decision maker and not so much about to sensitize the public, etc. So I think we have learned we have an opportunity going into 2030 to do what Pauline was saying, using the local voices. And that's why an initiative called the Advocacy Collaborative is looking forward to getting advocates grounded and making sure that we can step back and having the local voices that are sustainable with their influencers leading the way. The last thing I would say is about what Paul said is extremely important. I think it's been very frustrating for us to really work very hard and perfect the art of budget advocacy. We are able to bang allocations, but now we've realized, in my world, I'm calling it the same way we have continuum of care, I'm calling it continuum of advocacy. You cannot say a win is complete until money has gone into the right place and spent on the right things. So I think, especially to the funders of advocates, it's very important to realize that there's only, it's a longer process, and we need a lot of support to mature, the science to now take us to the next step and be able to connect the dots. And finally, to say a short funded program might not be able to speak and see some of the results, So my recommendation is that if anyone is funding advocacy, let's try to avoid these 6 months, 12-month kind of, firefighting stuff. That's not how this science works. Just like any other initiative, at least 3 years is reasonable enough for you to be able to do what Paul was calling a system-wise approach to advocacy, where you're able to monitor, track, and then use costed plans that are there to help decision makers, align better. Thanks.
Thank you for that one, Angela. As usual, you've laid out some of the key points for consideration. So I know that we have the last 15 minutes to our session. I'd like to give a shout out to, before we move on to the next question around what are the gaps in advocacy approach that we need to be working together to improve on. Any last word around tweaks and modification to advocacy approaches?
This is Joshua Ongwae. Maybe I can just say something about the same, but very brief. Sometimes integration is very key. Like, we can give an example of COVID-19, which changed the way things work and the way we operate. Advocacy teams, like across, especially Kenya and in the region, found it important to find a way of integrating SRHFP advocacy in COVID-19 response. So taking advantage of something else, like through integration, I think is one of is a really a key approach that can enable us to attain our advocacy goals. Yeah.
Thank you, Joshua, for that one. And speaking of COVID-19, and that was actually in my list of notes to bring up when we talk about tweaks and modification, is that this pandemic, while we now have vaccinations and that we will probably see, we're seeing lights at the end of the tunnel, is the reality that we face, that this is probably not going to be the last one, maybe for COVID, but there are other, and we have seen from previous, historically, that there are other emerging infections that is going to hit us. So I'm curious, in terms of, before we move on to the last questions, what are some of the key learnings that that we have implemented around advocacy approaches, like the need to engage with decision makers, to work with local champions, etc. What are some of those modifications that we have been able to implement because of the social distancing, the constraints in meeting in person, as well as the reprioritization of activities, and think about with or without these constraints, what are some of those learnings that we should include in our refreshing of advocacy approaches? And I remember that Angela also mentioned that when we were talking about the challenges of doing advocacy work in this situation. So I'd like to open the floor to just hear from people in terms of what worked and did not work, and what are some of the things that we as a community are looking forward to using in the future.
Maybe I could just put a small point on that, related
Yeah, sure.
to the COVID. And I think one of the things I've seen, I think, is a greater use of like the media advocacy, side of trying to push for sectoral support. And I remember, for example, we've seen very, we call them even cheeky posters on media, social media, related to how, the need, for example, for family planning is still important with lockdowns and all that. So I think that use of the media piece has sort of improved in a way, and people are able to log on to the virtual space, being the only space that folks could meet.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a struggle, I mean, for some of the foundational issues in terms of how to engage some of the decision makers. I think it's been much more difficult trying to get them and having to sit down with them and hold even if it's one-on-one meeting. So there has been some success with the media piece, but then I think we still see challenges, particularly where there are key decision makers and have to be engaged.
Thank you, Paul, on that one. Would you say that we're more expert now in using virtual video conferencing as a tool, that with or without COVID-19, is that we could actually use this across continents as well as across county borders?
Ricky, if nobody's making a
Pauline.
comment, can I? I think one of the things that I don't know whether we tweaked or we innovated, I find like it's more of an innovation, is we took advantage of COVID to engage really high level decision makers through a different model by placing human resource inside the offices of government and using them to drive a specific advocacy message and specific priorities. I'll give an example. For Kenya, what we did is to have the Director General of Health be able to facilitate to use social media and speak to the public and respond to public questions as well as issues we raised. For those who have, if you go online and you go to #AskTheDG, in Kenya, you will see us facilitating a whole different process where people, the public, would never have an opportunity to engage such a high level decision maker. But that hashtag enabled people to raise questions, and the support was a weekly response. So I wanted to share that as how we've innovated and tweaked our approaches because of the virtual reality and the fact that more people are online and people can take advantage of that to question their decision makers. I think there's still steps to take it further, but we feel it's a good beginning. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that one. I know that we're really pressed for time. I'd just like to make sure that we are able to answer the last question, is where and what are the gaps in the advocacy approach for resource mobilization do we need to be working together to improve? And if I may add to that one of the words that we have added to the title of this session was around sustainable. And so I'd like us to also take a look at what do we mean by sustainable, given that some of the examples that we're seeing in the field in terms of having funding agencies to support agents of change, agents of advocacy to build capacity, etc., is that once those funding ends is what happens to that effort. So there are two things here, which is to take a look at overall when it comes to really sustaining the resource mobilization for family planning, is what are the gaps, and and if there are gaps, is the what and how we could partner together to address those gaps. I'm opening the floor again for a quick feedback from the participants.
Hi, Ricky. Can I add in a couple of things?
Sure, please go ahead.
And this is Mozam. Just wanted to, highlight the issue of tapping into the aspect of strength of partnerships at the country level. I think partnerships is very important. Let me give you an example. Not in COVID, but rather a couple of years back during the Zika epidemic, I was working in some of the countries in Latin America. and we did a health system analysis in the context of sexual reproductive health. Now, what we came about, and as my colleague earlier on mentioned, we need to take these windows of opportunities that come along through COVID or through other opportunities like Zika in the past. So we had a discussion with the Ministry of Health that through this, for example, the health system analysis, we noted that there are huge issues of stockouts. So we immediately took on board the Ministry of Health and the UNFPA and a couple of local NGOs. So they were able to support minimizing the stockouts in the next 6 to 8 months. So, I mean, just taking advantage and using this opportunity, we can strengthen some of the challenges that we are facing in our existing services and in the context of family planning and more broadly sexual reproductive health. So I think my point was to strengthen and take advantage of the partnerships at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Moassam. I have Prima Kazura right in the chat, but Prima, please go ahead and use the mic to share your thoughts in Uganda. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Ricky. My name is Prima Kazora from Uganda, and for us as an organization, HEPS Uganda, we used the opportunity of COVID-19 to join the district task forces so that we are able to meet the decision makers, because we'd be sure that in the district COVID task force meeting, that the most of the decision makers would be there. So it would be an opportunity to meet them, and also sometimes add on the agenda to discuss SRH issues. Then I wanted also to talk about one of the key gaps on the use of evidence, making sure that our community advocates are able to be able to collect evidence on an issue, analyze it, and present it to the decision makers, which needs a lot of capacity building for them to be able to engage the decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that feedback, Prima. Yeah, so any other, we have the last 4 minutes here. We'd like to hear one more thoughts around gaps in the advocacy approach. Prima mentioned about being able to work with local community groups to advocate and use data in order to be able to speak and use evidence to advocate for resources.
Maybe I can go next.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Some of the gaps. Sometimes the commitments which have been developed are not smart enough, and sometimes they're not communicated to the right people. So when commitments are not part of the international commitments, are not packaged or brought down to the national level and subnational level, so they are part of the national family planning plans, and they can further be taken to the annual work plans where they're continuously and regularly tracked, then you find there is a gap. So I feel we need to support wherever we are working, for us to be able to package these particular commitments, to break them down so that people can be able to measure them more easily at the lowest level and where action is happening. From my end, I think that is one of the gaps which, like I've noted, especially when you review through the family planning plans developed by the national and subnational governments. So you'll find sometimes there are these inconsistencies, which I think should be looked at. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. So in our last 2 minutes of this session, and thank you very much and appreciate very much everyone's participation and continued interest and the sharing of insights. I'd like to open the last 2 minutes to just let people sort of share their takeaways and perhaps people who have not been able to speak out their voice to just turn on their mic and tell us what's some of the key takeaways from this roundtable that you'd like to share. Who's speaking, please? Yeah, Joshua, you were going to speak. For me, one of my takeaways is, of course, the partnership that we want to be doing. The second takeaway was really that as a technical person is being able to support and work with local groups and help them translate data into languages that the decision makers would be familiar and comfortable speaking to.
My takeaway is that there are a lot of similarities about what we do. So learning from one another, I think, will strengthen our advocacy, especially when we are working in the same locations. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Joshua.
Can I?
Mine.
Yes.
Sorry. Go ahead, Mwasam.
Please go ahead, Mwasam. Please go ahead, Mwasam.
Okay, thank you. My takeaway is that I think for domestic financing, it's not a single one thing approach, one angle approach. It's a multi-pronged approach where we are looking at the locally generated data, talking to the right people, engaging media, partnerships, capacity building, identifying champions. So these are all 5-6 key areas where we need to approach more holistically rather than just focusing on one point out of the whole thing. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And as many colleagues have mentioned, I think there are some good examples that need to be communicated to everybody to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mwasam. We are off our timing and we're supposed to end this session, but thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. Pauline is sharing an evaluation slide. If you can just use your annotate and stamp how your feedback around this session. And again, our sincere thanks for your time and your insights. Thank you. And feel free to leave the room to join the next session, which is, I think, starting after a break.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can use the chat box as well to make your comment.
Yes, please.
Or the stamp.
So we'll keep this link open until people are ready to jump off. Pauline, thank you so much for working on this one together with Angela. As well as, I think, Paul, you also contributed to the initial discussion around this one. Joshua, for the tool that you shared, we're going to make sure that it's included in one of the tools briefer to accompany this session, if that's a feature that we can work out with the organizers.
Thank you. It's okay.
Thank you.